Hey, it's Dale from quiltingcowboy.com, and thanks for tuning in again. Today am going to show you how to do a 9-patch. It's essentially the beginning of what we call strip piecing, right? Which is where we take strips of fabric, such as these. I'm doing a quilt currently that'll be for sale on my website that is going to help the families in New Zealand that were affected. Organization in Christchurch reached out to me and they're collecting quilts for the affected families, and so I have actually been tasked with creating one for the first gentleman who was killed in the mosque. And so that is what this is for, but this free tutorial will just kind of walk you through how to do a 9-patch, and it'll be a subset of that actual pattern, which will be posted for sale on my website. All the proceeds will go to help the families affected. So to start with your 9 patches, just cut your strips all the same width, right? And try and make them the same length. They're not always going to be, obviously, and you can just cut that off as you go. But yeah, just take 2 strips, put them face to face, and run them through the machine. And then I'll show you what to do next. All right, here we go. So as I'm going through here and adding my strips, I want to make sure that I pay attention to what was the part that first went into the machine versus the end, right? Because, why do I do that? When you do a long run of sewing, it tends to add a bit of a curve to it naturally, just because the feed dogs pull the fabric through the bottom just a tiny bit faster than the fabric goes through the top, unless you're using a walking foot, right? So that action of creating the feed dogs pulling the fabric through even just the tiniest bit faster, again, does lend a bit of a curve. So there's 2 ways to take care of that and actually identify what's the top versus what is the bottom. If you have just a pin, I will mark the top, right, that went into the machine first, just with a pin, so I know that that's the top, right? The other way to do that is just to take a little tiny piece of fabric like this and just run it through the machine between the strips. And so then that way you can cut it off, and that little piece will kind of hang on to the top of the strips itself, so always identifying what is the top and what is the bottom. But please keep track of that, because as we run it through to add the 3rd strip, we're going to want to run it through the machine the other way, so that we don't have 2 top here next to each other adding to the curve, but rather the first one, if it's curving this way, you counter it by running the other one through the machine the other way to hopefully kind of straighten it out a little bit. Does that make sense? All right, so that's what we're doing first. I'm just going to go through and make all my strips of 2, and then we'll move on from there. And then one more thing. I know you're like, shut up already. So much to say. But so when I'm running strips through the machine, if I have one, like this really true white, is much longer than this kind of like yellow white that's on top of it, right? And so what I'll do is the longer one goes on the bottom, right? And I'll show you a close-up of this just to clarify. So the longer strip goes on the bottom, and then as I get through to the end of this strip, what I'll actually do is continue to add shorter pieces onto the longer piece that's still remaining there once I get to the end of this. But let me show you that in close-up so you understand what the heck I'm saying. All right, so as you can see, I'm trucking along here, and this yellow white is shorter than the true white. And so what I'm gonna do is just grab another white. Actually, this one's a little short. Let me grab a longer one. Here we go. And so when I get to the end of this, like this, dun, da, 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 there, then I just pick up the next piece and line it up on top here, and just keep going. That way I don't have to keep stopping, but once I do get to the end of the strip that's on the bottom, I will cut off the top. just to make sure that they are the same length, although this one's pretty close. All right, so just keep doing that. Getting to the end of the strips here, and I'm just gonna run a little, what I call a parking pad in between, just a little scrap. Right, a little, so that I can keep track of the next ones as I start to run them through the machine as well. Pick up 2 more pieces, woohoo! And come on. So glad we got that on camera. All right, I have a bunch done here, and I'm just going to take them out of the machine and see what I got here. Because you don't want to do all your strips, right? Because you're still going to need to add a 3rd strip, right? These are 2. One, once we open these up, these will be 2, but then there's going to be a 3rd row that you're going to need to add to this, okay? So don't do all your strips. You need to save some for that 3rd row, okay? Now we're going to take it to the ironing board and review how to do that, because it is ridiculously complicated sometimes to get a long run, like a big strip like this, to open up evenly without creating an arc. All right, so that's really important, and we're going to look at that next. All right, so for ironing this thing, as you can see, I have quite a long strip here. The first, see how it naturally just kind of wants to lay and just bend and arc a little bit? That, I don't know if you can see it, but it's ever so slight. So the first thing that I'm going to do is essentially, and I really like, I specifically chose this cover for my ironing board because it has stripes on it, right? So I can line this up with the stripe on my ironing board to make sure that it is in fact going to be straight, right? And so I'll just take this and kind of just manipulate it with my fingers, right? And make sure that it is in alignment. I'm then gonna set my seams, right? Setting the seams at this point actually creates a little bit more moisture and flexibility in the fabric. And, right? Kind of just allows it to fall into place and reverse that kind of arcing motion. So that's the first thing you want to do, is get rid of that natural arc that you're going to have in your fabric. Okay, so that is done. It's now ready to just open it up here, and we're going to want to start from the center, and push that fabric away, just gently, just really, really, like, just kind of nudge it along, right? And then keep doing the same thing as you go along, making sure that just gently, that you're doing it, maintaining that perfect straight line, right? As you go through and just open up this. Okay, so there. Now I'm going to go through and just give it a little bit more of an aggressive press. And there you go. All right, so I've tried to do my best to get rid of that initial arc. It's opened up, and I still know which is the top because I have my pin there, right? So the next strip I'm gonna add along here, and then come at it from the other way. Right, so again, we're not doubling our efforts to create that arc, but rather making it kind of arc the other way. All right, so let's do that next. All right, so we've got this going on, right? And remember, this was like the top, that's where I noted that. And so, I'm gonna grab another strip, all right, and put it on, but this time, again, rather than running it through this way with this at the top, I'm going to run it through with this at the top so that I can, again, keep control of that natural arcing motion, and away we go. Ba-ba-da. So same situation as last time. This piece on top is a little bit shorter. You can see where it kind of ends there. So I can just grab another short piece, no big deal, and kind of add that in. That was a little short. Here we go. And I can just add that on top because, again, we're going to be cutting the strips this way. So if there's a little break here, that's okay. I will show you how to deal with that in a second, but let's just get these all added on. Little side note as we go through here and add this third strip, just make sure that, you know, your good sides are in fact still facing one another and that you don't have the seam on top, but rather the seam down, right? And the printed side is facing up, and then the other side, the printed face faces the other one. So both printed sides are facing one another. Otherwise, when you open it up, you'll have a seam on one side and not on the other, and you'll be sad. So just make sure you do that right. Okay, we got the third strip on. Now you can see here that this little piece here actually is a little bit short, right? And then it picks up again down here. So I'm actually just gonna cut that off to make it its own separate piece prior to taking it over to the ironing board. Just grab this. And so now when I take it over to the ironing board, it's a little more manageable as a strip of 3. This one is pretty good, so I'm just gonna go through and search which pieces are like that. See, this one's just a strip of 3, no problem, it's ready to go to the ironing board. This one needs a cut. Right? Because it was that long. Ooh, and another one, here we go. Okay, and so I'm just gonna go through, make sure that the pieces are as manageable as possible prior to taking them over to the ironing board. All right, got my third strip sewn on here. And oh, by the way, if you're like doing it where you put the little parking pads, the little pieces of fabric through, if you do it correctly, look at this. You end up with one parking pad on this end and another one on this end, verifying that you have run it both ways, right, through the machine. So again, just side note, taking care of that natural arc that happens to occur. But look at this, we're gonna put on our third strip here, same process as we did before, right? Just try and keep it as straight as possible. Set the seams. That also just makes that fabric that you're going to be ironing open a little more flexible because it's adds some moisture. And then press it open. All right. There you go. Okay. Ta-da! Oh, it's really hard to see in this light, isn't it? But it's 3 individual pieces, but because they're all white, it's hard to tell. Little side note, you might want to pay attention to, as you're ironing these open, that all of the back are folded over the same way. Essentially, once you cut them into strips of 3, when you're combining them together, the way that the back seams are folded will make a difference as to how easy it is to combine those strips, right? So this one originally was pressed this way, right? And so I'm gonna press this one the same way so that all 3, let me see if I can show you this real quick, are essentially going the same way. That will make it easier to assemble when I come to its neighboring strips if 3 of them are going one way and then 3 of them are going the other way. Let me show you. Right? So that these are, right, that's folded that way and this one's folded the same way, right? That way and that way. They're all facing the same way. That'll make it a little bit easier once we get into our next step. All right, this is where it starts to get fun, at least for me. So we have created our strips, right, that have the 3 strips on it, right? And so now we're gonna cut it this way across according to the same length to which you cut the original strips, right? So these strips I cut at 2 3/4 inches. So now I'm gonna go through and cut this way, each strip being 2 3/4 inches. So let's do that now. All right, so trim up the edge. You do not want this mess here. And what I'm doing is I'm lining up this line, just pick a line on your ruler, right? And make sure that it kind of both travels the seam at the same place so that you know that you're cutting it really truly square. And let me flip this around. And I'm just gonna start cutting 2 3/4 strips. So that is 2 3/4. Again, I'm gonna just keep watching the seams and lining up this and this. So I'm trying to make it as square as possible, right? So I'm watching this and I'm watching this to make sure that, again, we're getting it as close to perfect as possible. 2 3/4. Shablam. There's my first one. Now I just need to make 176 more. Okay, let's get busy. Oh, God. Okay, so don't be afraid to, as you kind of get near the end of the piece, like I'm looking at this and trying to line it up at 2 3/4, and it's just off on one direction. If I line it up this way, then this line is headed too far down and not across the seam, right? So I know at that point I need to kind of square it up a bit, and so just go through and see, look at, can you see that? It's the actual fabric is really winging off at the bottom there. So if I just go through and trim that up, now I know I'm back to square and I can keep on trucking. 2 3/4, shablam, there, it's all nice and squared up now. Hooray! All right, and I got one more piece out of that. Perfect. So essentially now I have the building blocks, right, of a 9 patch, right? Very simple, but I'm just gonna focus on the first 2, and I'm gonna grab my pins and take these 2, flip this over, and fortunately, because I ironed them going the other side, right, they're super easy to line up and just to lock in place, right, because that one's going that way and that one's going the other way, and just pin that down and then run it through the machine. Right? Easy enough. All right, it's sewn together, and just iron it open. Okay, now I'm gonna put my 3rd row on. All right, then just grab the 3rd row, fold it over, again, pin it into place. Then run that through the machine. So that is essentially the steps that are required to create a little 9 patch, right? And now they can be any colors you want. Typically, you know, this block, the center block, this block, and that block would be one color, and then the other 4 would be the other. But you know, use it for whatever purposes that you want. You can make some really fun patterns out of it. So you know, research those as well. And I hope that that was helpful. Hello, plane. What was that all about? But yeah, thank you for tuning in again to quiltingcowboy.com. I hope that this tutorial was helpful to kind of show you a few little tips as to making a perfect 9 patch. And then from here, I'm just going to put all my 9 patches together, and you'll see this amazing quilt that I'm going to be making for the family in New Zealand. So thank you again for tuning in, and as always, I appreciate your support.